Oops. That's not good. All right. So hi, everyone, and welcome to the Tech Talent Accelerators Exploretech Innovation Seminar. Today, it's going to be about interview tips and tricks with Tracie Orisko. As we get started, I'd like to just kind of give you some information about how the event will go. So please, this event is being live streamed on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. So please, if you during the presentation, if you can please keep your mics muted as well as your videos. Otherwise, you may end up in that live stream that will be sitting on the social media sites moving forward. Awesome. So with that, I'd like to just make a land acknowledgement. We're delivering this program in Toronto or Takaranto, and it is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the treaty and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. And we hope to honor that as we deliver this programming through here in the Toronto region. So with that, I want to ask you your first question in the chat, and this is just to know who's in the audience. So especially are the students that are in the audience, if you don't mind telling us, please, in the chat, what program you're in and what year of the program you're in at the moment, as well as, if you're a community member, please, if you could kindly share with us, the role and organization you're joining us from, we would really appreciate that. So in terms of an agenda, we'll give a quick overview of what the Tech Talent Accelerator is, and then I'll pass the mic to Tracie for the seminar. And then we will host a Q&A at the end, and please keep your questions, or as you think of those questions, you can place them in the chat, and we will raise them at the end of the seminar and respond to them. So with that, just want to give you a quick overview about the Tech Talent Accelerator. What are we? We're a training program that's designed to launch the next generation of industry-ready talent in the Canadian IT tech sector. We're a partnership with CompTIA, which is the largest IT tech industry association in the world, with a headquarter in the US and with a very fabulous chapter that we're working with here in Canada. And also the member companies. In terms of what we offer two programs. One is called Exploretech, which this seminar is a part of, and then we offer a program called Experience-Tech, which is a training and placement program. So the idea with Exploretech that you're participating in today is really to give you exposure about the IT tech industry. We've hosted over 10-15 of these. If you're looking to see the ones we've hosted in the past, you could go on our LinkedIn page and they're all there, and also on our YouTube and our website. And again, the idea here is we invite leaders like Tracie here to share insights about what the industry is doing and what are ways to enter the industry, what are ways you can think about the IT tech industry as new talent, so that you can better navigate your careers in thinking about having such a career in the tech industry. So those are the seminars. And then we also host a hackathon at least once a year, where we basically identify a challenge with an industry leader, a company, and then we pose that challenge to post-secondary students for them to form groups and propose solutions back to the industry about that challenge. And we host this once a year. And then the main program, and we actually just opened our next call for applications yesterday. So if you're a Ryerson student, hopefully you got this in your email somehow or through some notification, where we are taking in new talent applications right now for May and September. So please, if you're interested in the tech industry and you're a final year student about to graduate in April, or if you're about to graduate in August, you'd be eligible. So please see that call. And if you haven't gotten it, please, send us a note through our email or through our LinkedIn, and, we will get you the more information on it. And we will also host an information session about this program in the next week as well. So just want to first also acknowledge our advisory board, and a number of them are here with us in our in the Zoom today. So just looking at the participants, I believe Rita's here, Adam's here, as well as I think I saw Cynthia just come in as well. So our advisory board has been instrumental and incredible in building out the Tech Talent Accelerator, and they've been very supportive of us developing this program to get new talent into the industry. So just want to acknowledge and thank them for their support. With that, I'd like to introduce Tracie. So Tracie Orisko is a leader in sales development in the industry. A growth mindset is one of the largest drivers for her success, and she believes that the best way to grow companies is to grow the people. Her 7 years of experience in growing a technology-focused call center has provided her with a unique perspective into how to pick out candidates in an interview that will be drivers for change. She exited Managed Sales Pros in fall of 2020 and is now the Director of Sales Development at Huntress. So with that, please, Tracie, the floor is yours. I'll stop sharing and you can take over, and please, thank you so much for joining us, and we're looking forward to this.
Absolutely. Thanks for the intro. I forgot that I'd written that a while back, so it does make it a little bit of the introduce myself necessity. Everybody can see my screen? Fantastic. All right, so thanks everybody for joining today. We're here to talk about the art of interviewing, the tips and tricks on how do you get an interview, how do you create a strong interview, and then what do you do after the interview. Adnan gave me a little bit of an overview of who I am, but why me? Why am I qualified to sit here for the next 40 minutes and have you guys listen to me talk about the art of an interview? So these days, as Adnan said, I am the director of the sales development department at Huntress Labs. We're a cybersecurity startup. We've grown aggressively over the last 5 years, but most explosively in the last 12 to 15 months. I've had the pleasure of building my own team again here. I've got about 15 talented individuals on my department, but the goal of my space is what we call a pass-through environment. I am hiring people that if we do our jobs right as employers and they do their jobs right as employees, they will become the next level of employees at our company and will begin to grow into leaders in their own rights. When we do this, it takes a ton of interviewing. I probably have interviewed over the last, let's call it 12 to 15 months. I've probably interviewed 200 individuals. I interview for my own department, for entry level, management level, and operational level roles. I also have been asked repeatedly in the last year to interview for roles that are outside my department. Not because I necessarily understand exactly what a level 3 technician or the chief marketing officer should be able to do, but because I have a unique perspective in looking at how people might fit with cultural alignment at Huntress and how they may interact with the people that they'll be working with. When I interviewed at Managed Sales Pros, we were constantly looking for how do we build a bench. That ability to interview all the time is, I think, the biggest reason I got asked to present with you today. So when we think about interviewing, the first thing we want to do is start at the beginning. I got about a half dozen questions submitted in advance by those of you that RSVP'd to the session. And one of them was probably what focuses best on this slide. How do you stand out? How do you even get an interview? So for us, we're looking at a number of things. How do you become the front runner on paper? Because that's what we have to go on as interviewers. We don't get to know you in advance. We're looking at sometimes 50 resumes at a time for any given role. And there's a way for you to stand out. And the biggest way for you to be memorable is your cover letter. I get asked all the time, are cover letters important in technical roles, like they are in marketing roles or sales roles? And the answer is yes. The challenge is that that needs to be very specific to the role you are applying for. The generic, hi, I'm applying for this role I found on your website doesn't cut it anymore. You need to spend the time building a cover letter that directly identifies how you might fit in the role that you are applying for. One of the biggest ways that appeals to me as an interviewer, and when I polled all of the hiring committee people on my team here at Huntress, we talked about one thing. If you're going to build a cover letter specific, do your research on the position as well as the company that you are applying to work with. One of the big things is maybe finding out what their core values are, what their mission statements are, and find ways to speak to that in your cover letter. You want to be up to date on the hottest, newest things going on in that company. So for us, it's looking at our blog posts is where people find the most relevant information on what Huntress has been up to. And I'm looking for people who identify in their cover letter, even if they're what I would call catchphrases or take a shot phrases around our core values. Lead with transparency is one of our core values. It's easy to find. Anyone that can talk to that in a cover letter likely is going to catch my eye. Identifying skill sets that don't necessarily come through on a resume. Soft skills are a huge part of the hiring process these days. We no longer hire just for your technical skills. We hire for alignment in culture. We hire for how you work on a team, and you can't always see that in your paper resume. Using your cover letter to give us a little bit of insight into who you are is a piece that is very relevant. I will very often pop resumes to the top with cover letters. We use Greenhouse for our hiring tool, and it shows me right away, is there a cover letter attached to that resume? And when I'm sorting, I will very often go to those that started with cover letters. Do your research, build a cover letter. If you know who the hiring manager is, be individualized and specific and use their name. It's really important to be able to personalize and see a little bit of your brightness come through in that cover letter. It's where we get our insight. I think that the other thing that you should be doing is engaging with the hiring team or the leader of that department once you've applied. Not aggressively, not phoning 10 times, not identifying by email, when am I going to get interviewed? But again, anyone that reaches out to me on LinkedIn, I post my own jobs on LinkedIn. I talk about the roles. I talk about the style of leadership that I have at my department, but I also talk about the company. Anyone that reaches back out to me on LinkedIn and says, hey, I saw that post, I've applied for your job. The next time I have spare time, I'm going to look at that individual first. Doesn't mean they're going to get an interview, but it does mean that they're going to get some attention because they've gone the extra step of identifying that they want to talk to you and that they are actively looking for a role. We see a lot of times, especially in entry-level roles. I run sales development representatives and business development representatives. They're often an entry level into tech, and you will watch them apply for 50 jobs in 1 week because you can usually see it if you've got a hiring profile on LinkedIn. I can see what else they're applying for, and if they've taken that extra step, I know they're a little bit more interested in me, or at least that they're doing the work to reach out to every single company that they apply for. When I see it, I will absolutely work with the hiring team to get them moved forward in the interview stage. So if you're working directly with a recruiting company, make sure that they're helping you do that on your behalf. We're often working with recruiters externally as a company, but I think very often now, people that are interviewing work with recruiting teams that are moving them forward. Make sure you have a targeted plan in order to make that happen. The other way to stand out in the crowd is tailoring your resume to the role. You don't have to create dozens of resumes. No one has the time and energy to create 100 resumes if you are applying for 100 different roles, but you do need to identify in your resume how you meet the qualifications in the job description you were given. So if it says you must have 1 year, so for me, a really good example, you must have 1 year of cold calling experience or the equivalent experience in order to even be considered for the role. Your resume needs to show your cold calling experience. Going back to that cover letter, the cover letter is where you might show that comparable. Otherwise, we keep that out as no experience. If your resume doesn't show me that you meet the qualifications, I'm looking for the next one that does. If you haven't got that experience, show me on your cover letter how else you might be able to meet the need of the job requirements. Because we can't take candidates when we've got 100, we're automatically going to push the ones that don't look like they have experience. We hear a lot in the industry for entry-level jobs. So how do I get a job if I don't have experience? It is the chicken and the egg scenario. That's, again, I can't emphasize this enough, where your cover letter comes in to show us what you do have that might potentially make sense for us to interview you alongside candidates that clearly meet the 1 year of experience. I don't hire solely on hard skills. I would say most often I hire on a strong 50-50 combination of what do you have on paper and what do I think you can bring to the team. So those are a few things that you can do to stand up before you even get to the interview. There's going to be a Q&A at the end, so start compiling your questions, and anything from this section we'll go over at the end of the presentation. I can't say this part enough. Slow and steady is what wins the race. Thoughtful answers are the best answers. There's a huge amount of debate amongst hiring managers on whether providing questions in advance of the interview would make for better interviews for both the interviewer and the interviewee. I think for a lot of people, they believe it's going to allow candidates to prepare their response and be more polished. And I think there's real validity to that. And if anyone asks me in advance for the questions or asks the hiring team in advance for questions that they'll be asked in an interview, we will absolutely provide them. As an interviewer, though, I prefer to have people think on their feet. It helps me understand how a candidate might react in a live situation for the role that they are applying for. That being said, if I am going to ask questions without prep, I choose to set the interviewee up for success by letting them know that I want them to take the time to consider their answers. It's really important that people are comfortable when they go to answer a question. And if the interviewer doesn't set you up for success there, the concept of thoughtful answers are the best answers is still legitimate, and it's inherent upon you to create that environment for yourself if the interviewer does not. Letting them know that you are wanting to give the most relevant and best answers to their questions is important. Let them know you want to think through the answers so you give them the best foot forward. That's a great question. There's likely 5 different ways to answer that. Let me think for a moment and decide which one's the best way here. The other option, or the other issue, is that often you get asked a question that's extremely subjective. Don't hesitate to ask clarifying questions of the actual question that was asked. Before answering that, I think that you said X. Am I correct? I want to make sure you get what you're looking for out of this question. That piece is going to show the interviewer 2 things. First of all, you're paying attention and you're listening to the questions asked. And 2, the most important part to me in an interview, you present yourself as the type of person who measures twice but cuts once. We're looking as employers for people that can be proactive and handle situations quickly and easily, but still with that thought, and that starts right at the interview stage. So slow and steady also applies to ways that you speak. In stressful situations, and let's be honest, there isn't an unstressful interview that anyone has ever had unless you're independently wealthy and working for fun. We tend to speed up our speech when we're nervous. We tend to fumble our words when we're nervous. And that's where filler words is what we call them in the sales development industry. That's where those tend to come into play. And that's something that can make an interview fall apart completely. Go back again. I'm going to say it again, slow and steady wins the race. Take the time to think that interview answer through. And when you begin to give your answer, speak slowly and clearly. When they taught presentation skills to me in high school, I'm not sure that they do that anymore, but back when I went, we were told that you should sound slow inside your mind when you're speaking. If you feel like you're walking through water with your words, you're probably doing it right. I'm measuring my own cadence right now as we talk through this conversation. I feel like I'm talking at the speed of turtle, but I know that the slower I go, the more likely it is that everyone can consume what I'm saying. So thoughtful answers are the best answers. Make sure you clarify the question being asked so that you can answer it right the first time. And if the interviewer asks you to come back around on your answer, make sure that you don't feel offended by that. I have often asked a question where someone hasn't done the clarifying piece and has answered it in a way that didn't give me what I was looking for as an interviewer. I often will say to people, I wonder if you heard this when I asked a question. Let's go back, because what I really wanted to know was X. I'm going to give you a chance to answer that question again so that we can both get what we need out of this. Never be offended when an interviewer asks you to start again from scratch. Maybe they didn't ask the question properly of you, or maybe you didn't hear what they needed. Let them reset and start again for you, because that is going to allow you to give them all kinds of information that will get you further in the interview process. This is probably the most important part of interviewing for me, and that is being your authentic self and showing your true colors from step one, day one, moment one. This is my favorite Dr. Seuss quote. Today you are you. It's truer than true. There is no one on earth who is youer than you. When we hire, we're looking for diversity. We're looking for difference of opinion. We're looking to expand the culture of our team, not necessarily fit the culture of our team. We talk a lot as hiring managers how that individual will never be a better employee than on that very first interview stage. We tend to put our very first best foot forward during an interview, and we mold ourselves into what we believe the interviewer wants us to be. This creates huge risk for both the interviewer and the interviewee. When you go into what I like to call interview mode, it can be the equivalent of what we like to refer to over here as Instagram life. Everything is perfect on the surface. Nothing is amiss. Everything is smooth as glass. And you can maintain that for an hour. Maybe you can even maintain that over a series of 3 or 4 hour long interviews. But once you go to work to put in an 8-hour day, there is absolutely no way that you can maintain that perfect facade. It's not sustainable. We are now in a work from home world, for example, where life is full of interruptions. Maybe you have kids at home in the background. Maybe you've got animals of various sorts. I have a manager who has an entire menagerie of animals in her house that interrupt the day. Maybe there's noise and there's definitely chaos going on in the background. While you want your interview space to be quiet and reserved, you also want to let your light shine through a little bit. Individuals are also chaotic and noisy and interruptions. I want to see who you are from the first step, and I want to know about who you are. We are hiring to fill a spot on a team that needs growth. We're not hiring because we want 17 of the same people. I often get asked the question, I often ask the question, tell me about yourself, or introduce yourself to me. And people ask me a lot what I'm looking for when I ask that question. And I do ask it in every interview. It's the way that I start off. What I'm looking for is your authenticity. I want to know about you, not about your experience at work. Very often I will ask someone to tell me about themselves, and they will begin to give me their laundry list of accomplishments in their last role or the last 5 roles that they've had. I'm really looking for your passions. I'm looking for your interests. I'm looking for your hobbies. I'm looking for the things that make you unique. The questions generally, for me, helps me identify where are you going to fit on my team. One of the things that Adnan pointed out in my intro is that people growth and growth mindset is something that's very important to me. I hire looking for someone's genius zone. The genius zone is the thing that you are both passionate about and really good at when you plot out job duties and opportunities. I need that question to come through a little bit organically in the interview process. When you talk about yourself, I can start to identify, are you a visual learner or an auditory learner? Can I see whether you're detail-oriented? Maybe you're operationally focused. Maybe you're heavily creatively minded. All of those things are what I'm looking for to identify whether or not you're going to be a good fit on the team and whether the team is going to be a good fit for you. Being authentic also allows interviewers to look for what we consider red flags, where we need to ask more questions. Showing your true self, step one, allows us to understand where you're going to fit best and allows us to put you in a role that fits you well. Creating that space where you are a perfect employee just isn't sustainable. And as an interviewer, I have stopped full interviews and said, I feel like I've asked 3 questions now, and you've given me the answers that I want to hear. I'm going to ask you to take a moment and reset. And I want you to come back. We're going to start again because I want you to give me the answers that are actual. I often will say to people, go ahead and turn your camera off for a moment. Reset yourself. I don't want perfect you. I want real you. The other thing we talk about in interviews that I get some major pushback on from my team that I don't like to ask. Someone said to me, how can I make myself look like a rock star employee? I don't want you to look like a rock star employee. Candidates need to worry less about what makes you look like a perfect operations manager or a perfect level 2 tech, and think more about what makes them look like a valuable team member with that, again, that uniqueness and authenticity. One of the other questions that comes up in interviews all the time as well is, why do you think you are the best fit for this position? And that question is absolutely impossible to answer. You can't answer it because there is no idea for you to know who you're up against. I just got asked a question off screen. 30 minutes. Talking about the idea of not making things perfect. I'm working in someone else's house and they need something out of the space that I'm working in. So thanks for that appreciation of that short little interruption there. So going back to the why do you feel that you're the best fit? You can't answer that. I like people to tell me how they think they might be a good fit inside the organization in the role that they're taking. And when you get asked that, look for the top 3 qualifications or skill sets that you have based on the description of the job that you have applied for, as well as 2 soft skill pieces that you think would make you a good team member. Answering this with, well, I'm a team player, isn't enough. You need to dig a little bit deeper. So think about, in that specific role, reviewing the job description in advance. I will often start the beginning of the Q&A session with, what do you understand about the role that you have applied for? And that right there tells me, is that candidate applying for a role with interest on my team, or is that candidate simply applying for a role? It's not a make or break for me in an interview necessarily, but it does allow me to understand how much work that candidate has done to prepare for the interview. And sometimes it changes the questions order for me. I don't always ask the questions in the exact same order. When we think about interviewing, it's not just about, are you a good fit for us? We are now in an environment where candidates have to identify whether or not they're going to want to work at our place. There are lots of jobs. We're in a tech shortage for candidates, lots of jobs out there. We have to make sure that we are attractive to the individual applying to us. But we don't know what's important to you if you don't ask the questions. I spend half of an interview in an hour going over the questions that I need addressed. I then open the floor for 20 minutes of questioning from the candidate, if they have one. This is your chance to really identify, is this going to be a place where you fit? Because if it isn't, you need to know and we need to know. So ask questions about compensation. There is a lot of floating around information out there on whether or not compensation should be placed in the job description. And I don't know whether we do that, to be honest with you. I've never really looked to see whether we provide compensation information, but I can tell you that I provide compensation information in our interview process right up front. Everybody knows how much the job OTE is. Everyone understands the compensation methodology that Huntress chooses, and we do not create a process of pay scale. The job is what the job is, cost salary-wise, it doesn't change. We want candidates to understand how much money they have the ability to make, not have them wondering, is this going to be able to afford to pay my bills? I'm a big believer in taking money off the table and ensuring that what you're really doing is identifying, do you want to work for this company? Not can I afford to work for this company? So ask questions on compensation. How does it work? Especially if you are in a technical sales role where you have both salary, commission, and bonuses to consider. You want to ask questions about the growth path potential. If you don't know where you can go from the role that you're in, I don't know that it makes sense to take a job with that company. As I said before, our jobs in my department are slated to be a 12 to 18-month experience before they move on to what is hopefully the next job at Huntress. And if there's not a next job role there, then I'm hopefully going to be able to rehome them with a new company to be able to grow their genius side. Find out what the company thinks about growth for you. What's the timeline to be in that role? Where do you go next? What are the pathways? Who supports that? What are the sponsors and influencers in the organization that help you get to the next level? And what happens if there is growth for the employee and no place for them to go? I talk a lot in interviews about how if we don't have a home for you and you've done all the hard work, I will absolutely champion you into a job somewhere else. We recently had a candidate who's been with us for about 6 months come to their hiring manager and say, I got recruited and I'm thinking about accepting another job. Can I talk to you about it? And that led to an hour-long session with their manager and then a second 30-minute session with me where we went back over growth paths. Your manager needs to create that space to understand where you're going to go next. And you need to address that in the very beginning of the hiring process, or you get stuck in a job that doesn't necessarily meet your needs and can be a dead end. You want to ask questions about benefits, and you want to ask questions about staff wellness. Now, I live in Canada. I work for a US company. The conversations are a little bit different, but the idea of understanding what is your healthcare plan like? Where is mental health and work-life balance in your company? What do we understand about how to make sure employees are happy? Because that's an onus on the employer. We want you to ask questions about the core values of a company. Our job here is to make sure that you are a good fit for us, but your job is to make sure that we are a good fit for you. And culture is really important in my mind, as well as DE&I. So inclusion, diversity, equity, those pieces are at the forefront of interviews now. And ask questions about DEI policies inside the business that you are looking to join. If they don't have any, you could run into trouble down the line. And then the last thing that you want to do in your interview, in this asking questions section, is identify what do next steps look like. The interviewer should be providing that to you, but if you're proactive and ask about what does that process look like, you're able to walk through all of the pieces that you need to do to be successful. Is there a 3-step interview process? Do you have to talk to different levels of leadership? Is there an interview panel next? What does it look like? What is the timeline like? Because if you are applying for more than one role, you're going to have to juggle competing opportunities potentially, and you need to understand when you will learn what's happening from the company that you're interviewing with so that you can help staff rank them. For me, I'm very clear in laying out the number of days between interview 1 and interview 2. The process, so for us, we do, because I run the sales development side of the house, your first interview is phone-based. Most of my team works on the phone all day long. So we do a 30-minute phone interview. We then do an hour-long Zoom interview. And then depending on the outcome of that interview, the third step can be different. We might bring that candidate into a job shadow interview if they've never been in that role before, so they can clearly understand what that job does. Because to say we're an outbound sales development department means something entirely different at every single company. We might do a panel interview with members of our team or members external, and we clearly lay that out in the interview process. I want to go back to the beginning of the presentation now. We have sort of 5 minutes before I want to get into Q&A. Let's just go back and refresh. First, how do you stand out in a crowd? Tailor your resume. Create a cover letter. Show your soft skills. Take your interview process slow and steady. Think about your answers before you give them. Be authentic. Show your true colors. Make sure that at the end of that hour-long interview, we know a little bit about you that will help us understand that we are going in the same direction and we are creating an opportunity to work together well. And ask questions. I have a couple of specific questions, Adnan, that came through after I built my presentation that didn't get addressed in it. And I wonder if we want to start with those before we open to Q&A. We have a few extra minutes. Do we want to start with those questions here and then move to Q&A question?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Question 5 is, how do I find out what went wrong with the interview out of the 6 that I got? And I didn't build that into the presentation because I thought it might need a little bit of some live interaction. I love it when someone comes back to me immediately in that 24-hour slot after the interview, thanking me for the interview. Whether or not they know what the next step is, I love it when they say, I appreciated the hour that I spent with you. I would love some feedback as you go through the process of making your decision on what I did really well and where I could have improved my interview process. Asking those questions right away gives me a chance to go back and think about you before I make a decision on whether or not to hire you. If you have done that extra step of asking for feedback, and I actually had a candidate once that I wasn't planning to hire. And they came back to me and said, I feel like I didn't present as well as I could have in that interview. Have you got some tips on things that I might be able to do better? I'd love a second chance at an interview. I provided 3 pieces of feedback and asked them if they wanted to interview again. And their second interview gave me all the things that I needed. I ended up hiring them and 9 months later promoting them into an operations space. There is opportunity to find out what went wrong before you find out you didn't get the job. And to be able to course correct right there. And the other way to do that before you get off the interview is ask the question right then and there. I love it when someone says, I appreciate your time today, Tracie. Is there anything you didn't get out of this interview that you require? Is there anything that I missed that you were expecting to hear from me today? Taking ownership of the way that you present is really important, and being able to do it right then and there. I always have 5 minutes, just like these 5 minutes. I always take them, keep them, and hold them in case somebody has something they want to go back and address, or in case there is a feeling on either side that that interview did not go as well as they'd wanted. One of the other questions that came in, just popping through the list here. Any tips for dealing with questions that I didn't expect? So as an interviewee, I get overwhelmed when I plan certain answers, when I get questions that I didn't plan for. Coming up with a response on the spot can be challenging. Any help with foggy brain syndrome because of nervousness? The easiest and hardest answer to that is try not to pre-plan what you're going to say. Pre-plan instead the knowledge about your skills, but when you create answers before questions are asked, unless you have those questions in front of you, what you do is create a closed mind for how you're going to answer. There's no ability to move on the fly when you've predetermined the things that you were going to say. The good interviewer should ask you a question that you're not prepared for. Coming into it with an open mind of I'm willing to answer more or less any question. And when it comes to the foggy brain nervousness, I have no problems with candidates who stop and say, hang on, I need a second. Again, going back to that slow and steady. Be very clear. If you need a minute to collect your thoughts, take a minute and collect your thoughts. You will give a much better answer after 30 seconds of silence and thinking than you will if you begin to right out the gate. Jump on that question. Take the time. Interviewers want you to think about it. Don't be concerned about silence. Feel free to preface the silences. I'd love to think about that for a moment to give you the best answer that I can. But definitely do not feel like you can't be slow and steady in the way that you answer. There's lots of ways to combat that nervousness by prefacing, I've had interviewers say to me, I'm so nervous right now. And I'll say, great, so am I, because it's a big decision. So think about I think when we talk about large group audiences, think about someone in the audience and focus on them. In a small group interview, I like the idea of focusing on the fact that the interviewer, while maybe they're not nervous of the interview itself, those interviewers are nervous about making bad hires. So they've got just as much at stake in an interview as you do. If you think of that while you're considering answers to your questions, you're less likely to be nervous. I hire on a regular basis because of my past department. And if I make a mistake, it's a lot of work for me to get out of it. So I have just as much at stake in an interview as the interviewee does. All right, Mohammed, I see that you've opened the chat.
Yes. So please, if you have a question, please ask it in the chat. And also, if you'd like to ask it directly, please, there's a emoji where you can raise your hand. If you did that, we could call on you and you can unmute and ask it directly. So I have a question that's come in. Hold on, I'm just going to read it out. Okay, I think they're still typing out their question. So let's see. So there is a question about LinkedIn. So I do want to acknowledge this. I attempted to put us on a live stream that didn't work out. So we will be posting this video after, and it will be on LinkedIn within a few days. We will have this on our YouTube and on LinkedIn as well. So again, I apologize, but there was a technical issue there and I didn't want to pause the seminar to try and fix it in the middle. So do apologize for that. Okay, so there's a hand raised by Vanessa. Go ahead, Vanessa. You can unmute and ask if you'd like to come on video. You can do that as well.
Yeah, awesome. I'm just in my kitchen a little bit crazy eating late lunch, but I just wanted to say that was a great presentation. I learned so much. I wrote a bunch of notes, but I wanted to know, what was the best response you have heard from an interviewee that you said like, wow, that blew me away?
The best thing I have ever heard from an interviewee has nothing to do with an interview at all and has everything to do with attention to detail. I had, and he since works on my team, he's been with me for a number of months now. I interviewed an individual who was the lead bartender and a second level sommelier at a restaurant that I really like to eat at and that I eat at regularly in the before COVID times. And I said to him, based on the research that you have done on our company, what can you tell me about myself? And he was able to tell me what Manhattan I like to drink, because he'd served me at that bar a number of times over the course of, and so it had nothing to do with anything. It was a question that normally someone comes back and says, oh, I see that you are very active in Women in the Channel, or I see that you are motivational. I see that you get asked to speak a lot. And this guy said, you drink your Manhattans with Booker's bourbon straight up. Nothing to do at all with interviews, but did absolutely make me hire him.
Yeah.
There were other reasons, of course, that I hired him, but the attention to detail that showed me meant I knew he was going to be able to take the notes that were required for a sales development rep to excel. Relationship building was the role he was applying for, and being able to see that made me realize if he could remember that from 3 years ago, the odds are he could remember to write down 7 things that happened in today's conversations.
Oh, awesome. Sorry, in the beginning, it kind of cut off. I was like trying to transition to my earphones. You were saying that you went to a bar and somebody remembered your order from 3 years prior and you were able to hire them because you thought like, wow, like what an intelligent young man.
What a attention to detail oriented individual. And that is probably for me, the thing I'm looking for most, because my team does nothing but build relationships all day long. And the difference between a sales development rep that picks up the phone and cold calls you and remembers that last time you spoke, that you had to take your dog to the vet, and you couldn't talk then, but please call you in a week. That's the difference between making a sale and not making a sale in my world.
Wow, thank you. That was very,
Absolutely.
very wise. Love that. Thanks.
Thank
And
you.
then it looks like we have a question in the chat on what makes the good first impression on camera or in person.
Yeah, go ahead.
The answer to that for me is dress for the job you want. I like, even in this world of you can work, and I'll be honest with you, I'm wearing a dress with a pair of running pants under it right now. 100% I am, because I was cold. We only have one chance at a good first impression. Show up for your interview like this is the job you want and that you want to get a better job next. That doesn't mean you have to wear designer clothes. It means you need to do the effort. Put on something clean that fits well. Show up with your hairbrush. It is the little things that count. That first impression of your well put together is extremely important in my world. And I came from an industry in the call center world in Las Vegas where we were what we call a second chance employer. And so some of the people that we interviewed were homeless. They were coming out of domestic abuse shelters. They were coming out of jail programs. When they made the effort to find the right well-fitting clothes that were clean, made all the difference in the world than showing up in clothes that were definitely being worn for a week, right? We had a lot of people that say, oh, I went and borrowed from my friend's house. So show up wearing something that shows you want the job that you got plus the job you could have next.
Awesome. So I did get a question privately. Thank you for that, Tracie. This has been very insightful. And I think what you've done here is you've kind of painted some, there's some assumed boundaries in an interview that interviewees assume. You can't ask questions, you can't ask this or that, or take 30 seconds to really collect your thoughts. I mean, I really liked the items you've shared to show that there is space to improvise and be yourself and take the time you need to be thoughtful and considerate in making your responses. So that was quite neat, and trying to even think of it on my own, in terms of an interview process. So thank you for sharing that. So I do have another question. This was sent to me privately. The question is about, imagine there's a interview you're doing and there are 10 qualifications for it, and the individual fits 3 of those qualifications, and then they know they don't fit the rest of the 7 as well. So how would one respond to a question about their fit for their role? Should they say, I fit 3 qualifications really well, and I don't think I fit the 7 that well, to be that transparent? Or would you say that just focus on the 3 you are fit really well and leave it there? Or how would you respond to a question like that?
The first answer, Adnan, that you gave is the right one. Clearly, I fit these. I am willing to learn the others. I'm willing to do the work. I take instruction well. I'm a fast learner, an auditory learner, a whatever learner. Identify what you fit and that you are willing to do the work. There are very few people in the world that fit every box on every category. And I'm going to make a bit of a plug for sort of women in the industry. We know that reliably women will not apply for jobs where they only meet 3 of 7. We need to stop thinking that way, because the skills that are transferable, that lead you to be able to learn the rest of those opportunity skill sets, they exist in a company. Often as an employer, I want to mold those pieces myself anyhow. So if you fit 3 of the 7 and you made it to the interview process, don't hide and pretend that you know 7. We already know that you don't. Give us an opportunity to see how we could help you learn them together. If you gloss over that, you lose an opportunity to show someone your eagerness to learn and your willingness to be coached.
That's a neat response. I see how so you're basically essentially saying like, take it as a positive side to your drive to learn. So don't say it as a negative in your skill set, but to say that I can take it on, I can learn it. Give me the chance and I'd be able to do it.
The question I never ask, Adnan, is what is your skill and what is your weakness? Because inherently, your skill is your weakness and your weakness is your skill in any given opportunity. There's an ability to look at both sides of those. My skills in one sense are my weaknesses in another, depending on what room I'm standing in as a leader. And the same thing with job ability. I earned my way into every job I ever had. I wasn't qualified for any of the jobs I ever earned in my life. I earned them by doing the work. I didn't come into them with skill sets. There was a question in chat that says, what time is considered on time? When the interview is there, 5 minutes before, 15 minutes before. That is becoming less important, I think, in the digital world, because people are running from meeting to meeting, Zoom to Zoom to Zoom. I like to be 5 minutes early for everything. That means all you have to do is show up before. In this world, all you have to do is show up before the person opens Zoom, if they know you're already sitting there. In person, I believe that it's respectful to show up 15 minutes early. If I had interviewees that did that, again, they're more likely to be good at showing up for work on time if that is important. Now, I believe that on time is late. So if you show up at 11 and your session starts at 11, you're still trying to spend a couple of minutes getting organized. So 5 minutes before on a Zoom, be there, be ready. That Zoom meeting opens, you should be in place.
Awesome. That's a good point. That's actually especially with Zoom, how you can, you know, with in-person meetings, there's a lobby or there's a reception and there's seating arrangements need to be made. You need to be taken to a room and stuff. But with the Zoom, it's like a click of a button. So like in a second, you're either on time or you're later than the interviewer. So it's important that you consider being there just at least a few minutes before. So I can see that. Awesome. And then I have another question that was again sent to me privately. It was around I think it's something similar, but I'll ask it to see if you had, if you wanted to elaborate any further. It would be, why do you think you would be the best fit for this position? So this is a kind of a typical interview question, and you know, how do you suggest interviews handle that?
I suggest that interviewers flat out say, I'm not positive I'm going to be the best fit because I don't know who else is on your candidate roster. I can tell you where I feel I fit in this organization based on the research that I did. And then you give them, we kind of talked about this too a little bit. Let's go back and reiterate. Give them 3 pieces of knowledge from your resume, of experience. These are the 3 things where I really closely align my skill set aligns with the job. Then give me 2 soft skills where clearly our cultures may align. And culture being culture of the company, culture of the team. I start off every interview by talking about how I lead through the basics of atomic habits, and I lead through infinite game theory, and I lead with a team over self mentality. I will talk to people at the beginning of the interview for a minute or 2 about how our team functions. When I ask you where you will enhance my team, which is usually the way I ask that, show me that you heard what we said in the beginning of the interview, or show me that you did the research on what my beliefs system is. I'm pretty open book. Everyone on LinkedIn knows that I talk all the time about how much I love infinite game theory or start with why or all of those sort of catchphrase leadership pieces. They know which ones are important to me. Show me where you are the best you, not where you are the best candidate. I think that question is improperly asked. You don't know how you're the best fit because you don't know if the next person before you checks all 7 of those 7 boxes.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And then there's one question that was sent again to me privately. I can go through, but before I do that, so we'll do these 2 questions. I'll ask you one of my own, and we'll do another one that was sent to me privately as the last one. But one piece, you know, that I think kind of resonates through the themes you've pointed out in terms of doing a good interview. I think one key theme, I think, is, you know, it's the research on the company and the job that you've applied to and you've gone the interview for. And I feel like, you know, that's really important to highlight, just that, you know, please, you know, I just want you to take some time to talk about that. You know, that like research is so key to be able to deliver a good interview, like to know who the person in front of you is as much as is publicly available, to find out who they are and what they're doing and what their career paths may have been, and really digging deep and trying to understand, who you're interviewing with and the company as well as the role. Do you want to speak a little bit to that, Tracie?
There's only so much research that you can do. And if you're applying for 10 jobs, you don't necessarily have the time to drill deep down into everything. Websites most often now are set up with core values or mission statements or vision statements. That's the easiest place to go. But LinkedIn is probably the best place to do the research on the leadership of that company. So you don't always know necessarily who is going to lead the team that you're on, because you may have an interview panel. Everyone knows that once you get invited, you should research everybody on your panel. So very often I have a panel of myself and 2 of my individual team contributors. Go ahead and do that work, looking at all of them and figure out what's the commonality and what do you maybe have. So I'm a scuba diver. If somebody picks that up through the basis of my LinkedIn or my online presence and talks about it in an interview, I know they've done research. It doesn't always have to be research on the job. Let it be commonality, right? So for Justin and I, it was Manhattans. We have a common theme of love of bourbon. I have other candidates who I've applied for positions with who were divers. I'll build that in all day long.
Awesome.
Doesn't have to just be business.
Thank you. So things, commonalities, what resonates between you and the interviewer. Those are good items to flag and good items to bring up in an interview as well as a way to kind of describe yourself. Awesome. And then one last question. So there's a private message sent to me towards about, an individual who's describing their efforts to try and find a job. They describe how they have a great resume and experience. They've been attempting to find a role for the last 2 years. And then they've gone 6 interviews so far, but not been able to land a job yet. Like what are some advice you would give to this individual?
So the advice that I give them before they do the next interview is go back and ask for feedback. If the job market is, it can be really hard, it can be very competitive. Find out why those last 6 roles that you applied for, find out why you didn't get them, go back to that. What do I do after the interview? Ask for feedback. And I think it's important to clearly lay that out in an interview in a way that doesn't create anxiety for you, because we look at gaps in resumes. So if you haven't had a job in 2 years, that doesn't preclude me from interviewing you, but I'm probably going to ask about your resume gap. And you're going to have a story. Make it short and sweet. I lost my job at the beginning of COVID based on the fact that my company laid off all of their individuals. But if you have been fired from something, probably now's the time to tell someone. So if your last role ended because of experiences that were within your control, talk about it then and there, because it's going to come out in the wash. I always ask people, we do a what do we call it, background check. I would say to my team, this is the next step. Is there anything I need to be concerned about? There's lots of things that might come up there, but there's often opportunities in an interview to share your trials and tribulations in a way that helps the interviewer understand you are looking at this point maybe for any job. There's nothing wrong with applying for the job that is going to get you the income you need to get the job you really want, but be clear with your the company that you're hiring. Listen, at this point, I would wash floors if that's the job that came opportunity for me because I need a job. There's nothing wrong with saying that, as long as you are clear. Maybe this job becomes the job that leads the next thing. For my role, that's very often we're a stepping stone, but I think that you need to be clear and identify, this is a job I need. Awesome. Not necessarily a job I absolutely want right now.
Understood. Thank you so much, Tracie. I know we've gone about 4 minutes over, so I don't want to apologize and but say thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate this. For the participants that are here, there's 2 events I want to just flag. One is we're doing an information session next week. That's in the chat. And then we'll be doing another seminar, which is going to happen later in March, which will be about navigating your career. So thinking about, once you get into a job, how do you navigate your tech career from there? And Rita, our advisory board chair, will be helping us host that one. So please look out for these and please follow our LinkedIn page. That's where we post all our information first. So that's where you'll get to know what's happening with the program as well. And again, thank you so much, Tracie. So appreciated, and really appreciate your time and sharing these great insights with all of us today. Thank you, everyone,
Thanks
for
for your
joining us.
time today, everyone. Take
Awesome.
care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. All right. Thanks, Kareem. Really appreciate it. I'm gonna jump off now.
Awesome.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, bye. Take care.